let's talk about genre. Okay, what is a genre? It's a category or a type of literature, but you can also have genres within music and movies and television shows and plays and everything else. So, you know, like with Shakespeare, we talked about genres that he likes to write were tragedies, histories, and comedies. And so some different examples of music genres, pop, country, and rock, and movies, kind of like the play categories, tragedies, horror, romance, and comedy, because it's all drama. And then we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of genres in this genre unit. Some examples are listed there on the picture, like fiction, nonfiction, folktales, drama, and poetry. So it is a category or type of literature.
All right. Narrative nonfiction. Now we've talked about narration. We've talked about nonfiction. Now we're going to combine them. So what is it? A classification of writing where the author writes a factually accurate story, usually after researching the specific details of the topic. So here's the important part. It has to be factual and it has to be accurate. So synonyms are true story, creative nonfiction, or literary narrative.
And the thing to understand is that when people think of nonfiction, they normally think of newspapers and magazine articles and things like that, which is fine. Those are definitely nonfiction. But narrative nonfiction implies that it's a story with a plot line. Okay, so we're talking about the fictional plot elements, even though it's a nonfiction story. Okay, so memoir is one type of narrative nonfiction. So a memoir is a nonfiction narrative, which is a record of life events written by someone having intimate knowledge of them. So almost all of the time, a memoir is written by the person who experienced it in their life. So the author is the protagonist. A specific type of autobiography, where someone looks back on an experience or a certain part of their lifetime reflecting upon it. So, for example, a memoir you might write or draft would be if you had a terrible summer where your dog Fido died because he was a Chihuahua and he was ran over by a motorcycle and you had to bury him in your backyard. Not saying that that happened to me. Not saying that my mom placed him in the garbage can instead of burying him in the ground. Not saying that happened to me. Anyway, if I had written about that, that would be considered a memoir. And memoirs are usually pretty fun to read if you can find one that's written by an author you can connect with.
A motorcycle only has 2 wheels. How'd your dog not miss those? Alright, a biography. Biographies present facts about an individual's life and makes an attempt to interpret those facts. Explain the person's feelings and motivations. It uses research to acquire as much information as possible and takes into account the context in which the person being written about lived in. A lot of times we have biographies about presidents because their life is very documented. People can go back and research and look up all the things that were taking place at their time and put it into their biography about that person.
And so while a memoir might be written about a random person you've never heard of, a biography is usually about famous people that everybody knows.
Who's this girl in the corner? Oh, Michael Jackson, my bad.
Billie Jean is not my lover.
Alright, so common characteristics of biographies. Often starts with birth or early life and often covers birth to death. Unless the person's not dead, then it doesn't do that. Explores early influences on a subject's later life. Delves into the years that shaped the person. So when they kind of became the person that they are.
And so in Michael Jackson's biography, if someone were to write it now, which I'm sure someone has, I just haven't read it, they might look at the experiences that Michael Jackson had as a child and what would have caused him to want to look like a girl when he was an adult man.
Why he had so much plastic surgery.
And had long curly hair. Uses direct quotes. Gives historical and cultural background information that influenced the person. So in Michael Jackson's case, he grew up in a family of musicians, so that'd be a big part of his background information. Uses direct quotes from person and those who knew him or her, so they're trying to get primary sources that they can use.
And then the biographer possesses a point of view, a larger agenda, and a purpose in reporting on that person's life. In other words, you got to watch out for the bias. In presidents, if they really like a president, they're not going to tell you much about the bad stuff. If they dislike a president, that's all they're going to tell you about, and nothing positive that they have done. So you have to watch for the bias.
Okay, so that brings us to the third type of narrative nonfiction we're talking about, which is autobiography. Definition of autobiography is the story of a person's life written by that person themselves. So in that way, it's similar to a memoir. The difference is that usually an autobiography spans a person's life from birth until they're writing the autobiography, whereas a memoir is just reflecting on a certain part of their life, usually. So some characteristics of autobiographies: they are first-person accounts, so both autobiographies and memoirs are written in first person, whereas biographies are written in third person. Autobiographies are often highly personalized, meaning it's about their life, so it's a personal story and it's emotional. And they may be supported by authentic pictures and newspaper articles. So that's another difference between autobiography and memoir. Technically, a memoir is a type of an autobiography, but usually autobiographies have more research to support dates and things like that than memoirs, which are related to memories.
All right, differences in narrative nonfiction genres. Autobiographies and biographies rely upon research to convey accurate information, while memoirs are more of an informal reflection based off memories. That was what Miss Cruz was just talking about.
And I just want to add, too, remember with a memoir, it's really important that readers learn something about life in a memoir. So even more so than an autobiography or a biography, memoirs should almost have a moral that you take away from the story.
Did you do that? Second, with autobiographies and memoirs, the author writes... You just read?
Yeah, they write. I kind of talked about this, but it doesn't hurt to reiterate. The author writes about his or her own life experiences, which is first-person point of view, whereas with biographies, remember, the author writes about somebody else's life, which is third-person point of view. And autobiographies and biographies usually span the full course of somebody's life, while a memoir is just a part of it.
Fantasy.
We're not doing that because that's not narrative nonfiction. That's definitely fiction. So we'll pick up with some other genres next week.
But it looks fantastic.